being newer.
When
So
did you?
I want to thank you, David Wayne Johnson from the Department of Community Development, the DCD, for joining us today to talk about a topic that is fascinating and highly technical.
Yes.
And fascinating because as a maritime community, more of us should care than do. And yet some of the questions show that there is a huge amount of care. Um, this review of the program has been working its way through a task force, and then it's going to go to planning commission, and there's lots of opportunity for public input. And this is your opportunity to help reshape this program to the extent that we can. So a little bit of housekeeping. You're muted on entry, so please try to remember to unmute yourself when you want to speak. And I know it's hard to do. And just remute yourself so that we don't hear the kitten and the kids and all of that that you don't want us to hear. We are recording it, and in about 2 days, 2 business days, it's generally up on our YouTube channel. During the cafe, if you have questions, you can throw them in chat. We have some questions that came in about this program from Facebook during the week while we were marketing. We'll see if we can get some answers to those, because even if they're not on the call, they will be looking for the answers on YouTube. And, you know, with these difficult times we're living in, it also provides some tremendous opportunities. And this Shoreline Master Program is an opportunity for all of us. And so with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to David Wayne.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me and this opportunity to speak to folks, especially in the chamber and the business community, about our update to the Shoreline Master Program, which are the regulations that we apply when someone applies for development within 200 feet of the shoreline. Now, those shorelines include the marine shorelines as well as lakes and rivers. But I want to make sure that you understand what type of an update we're doing. It's called a periodic review as opposed to a comprehensive update. We did a comprehensive update 6 years ago, and the reason it was comprehensive is because we basically rewrote the entire program, because we were up to that point operating under a program that was first written in 1989. So there's a lot of things that changed since 1989 to 2012 is when we really started it. And we didn't get it completed until 2014. And so we had to incorporate all those changes that were made in state law, as well as best available science, and a lot of things that we didn't address in the first program that needed to go into this comprehensive update. So for the past 6 years, we've been implementing and applying that shoreline program to development applications for development in the shoreline. And we have, you know, we've been keeping track of some of the problems that we've had with the program. And, you know, they're typical things for the most part. There's typographical errors. There's mistakes in cross-referencing other code. There's lack of clarity in interpretation or in statements that other people can interpret differently. And in some cases, we actually had to write a formal code interpretation to clarify what the code actually means and how we're going to apply it. So over the 6 years, we've been keeping track of these things. And then the state Department of Ecology actually has jurisdiction over our shoreline program through the Shoreline Management Act, which is a state statute. So they have the state level of authority, and they supervise us as far as the Shoreline Master Program, which, by the way, is just one chapter in our Unified Development Code. So that's our land use code for Jefferson County. It's chapter 1825, and it actually stands alone as its own ordinance. And another standalone ordinance is the critical area ordinance, and those two overlap. And we adopt the critical area ordinance into the Shoreline Master Program. But those are their standalone sections or chapters in the Unified Development Code. And the state requires everybody planning under the Shoreline Management Act to update periodically, every 8 years. You have to go through and you have to show that you're current with state law, and that you're making changes based on new information, change in circumstances, best available science, and you're making the corrections that you need to make, and also codifying those code interpretations that you made along the way to interpret sections of the code. So that's what we're doing right now. This is not a comprehensive update. We're not rewriting the whole thing. We're just basically doing a lot of housekeeping and cleaning it up to make sure it's consistent with state law, and we're looking for other opportunities, however. And so Arlene mentioned that she was on a task force, and that's the Shoreline Master Program Task Force that was formed. And that task force was formed specifically, I think, for the most part, to look at what opportunities we might have to revise the code through the lens of regulatory reform. Now, regulatory reform is a resolution that was passed in 2019, primarily spearheaded by Commissioner Brotherton, who talked to people during his campaign for commissioner, and he heard a lot of complaints about permitting in the county, how it was onerous, how it was too expensive. A lot of special reports were required, which added to the expense of permitting, and not just in the shoreline, but over across the board. And so in 2019, the commissioners passed a resolution 1719, and the main points of that resolution, and I think this is important for people to understand that they've done this, because we're actually trying to make things easier and less expensive and more timely than they have been. And this is a really good thing that I've observed. I've been with the county 17 years, and I've been assigned this task of doing the periodic review. And in all that time, I haven't seen a lot of push to reform our regulations. So this is a really good opportunity to do that. But the resolution basically says, we want to protect Jefferson County's environment and public health. That's our charge. Health, safety, and welfare of the citizens, that's primary, that's first. But we also are going to look for opportunities to streamline and simplify the structure of the county code to make it understandable and efficient to comply with and administer. And that makes a lot of sense, because if it's easy for the applicant to understand and apply for, it's easy for staff. So it's easy for everybody. And why would you want to do something that's harder than it needs to be? So that's a big push. Then access, assess the required professional studies and identify overly burdensome and costly barriers to code and permit review processes. A lot of this, the area of our county is in geohazardous areas, landslide areas. And a lot of our code requires a geotechnical report in order for you to develop. And so there's also wetlands. I mean, you need a wetland delineation to determine what the buffer is. And so we're asked to look more closely at those types of regulations to see if we can't, instead of just by route asking for a geotechnical report or a wetland delineation, if we can determine that we can permit whatever's being asked to develop without those costly reports. That's a big part of this. Another one is to allow county departments greater flexibility to allow minor exceptions that retain environmental protections and public safety. So giving us more discretion to make discretionary judgment calls, even if it may conflict with the letter of the code, it still meets the purpose or intent of the code. It's a little more work for us, but I think it's going to make it easier and less costly for everybody. Then streamline the permit review procedures. That's we're working on that right now. We've done as Jay mentioned, we had the lean training. So we did that a couple years ago. We identified a lot of areas of things we didn't actually need to do. There were a lot of redundancies that we eliminated. We're moving to a new software system right now. We're in the process of migrating all the data from our old system to our new system. And this new software system is going to be great. It's going to really speed up the process. So that's one of the things we're working on. And then finally, enhanced transparency and accountability for timely reviews. So those are the nuts and bolts of the resolution for regulatory reform. And so the task force that we founded as part of this periodic review process, which by the way includes a whole component of public participation, which I'll talk more about, and the opportunities that the citizens have to weigh in on our revision, required early, continuous, and ongoing public participation. So we formed a task force for the critical area ordinance update last year, and Greg Brotherton was also the spearhead on that. And the focus was on regulatory reform, but it was really, it ended up being more about the agricultural development. In this case, we wanted to have a task force that was made up of local citizens who had a stake in shoreline development or the marine trades or environmental protection related to a shoreline and marine environments. And we had a great group of people. And we had a couple that were from state agencies, but we're going to do that on a separate track. We wanted this to be specifically about public participation and the local citizens who had an interest in the shoreline. And so we formed a resolution to form that task force because it is actually a Board of County Commissioners advisory group. The board determines who's going to be on that group and the task force. And we had to write a resolution for that. And that resolution basically says that we're establishing this task force to advise the county with recommendations as to the county. It finalizes its draft updates to the SMP, the Shoreline Management Plan. The task force will soon serve as a sounding board, informing the Board of County Commissioners to consider possible revisions to the SMP through the lens of regulatory reform. Now that's that resolution on regulatory reform. So that's a main component of what we were looking at in terms of revising the code. Can we make it easier? Do we have processes or permitting requirements in the SMP that are onerous, that we can simplify and make easier for people? And we've identified those. The task force process will combine elements of visioning in the broad contracts and learning about limitations that may reveal some ideas as infeasible. The task force will identify critically important areas and aspects and issues related to the marine environment and shoreline development and regulations that should be considered in the SMP review. Task force will also consider various constraints such as the requirements of state law, staffing capacity, it's an important one, and resource allocation. And finally, the task force will follow up on issues and refinement of the periodic review scope through the iterative process of subsequent meetings. That's a big part of this public participation plan, is that we will have subsequent meetings with the task force, with the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners as well. So those are all opportunities for the public to participate. Now, some of the topics that came out of the task force meetings, and Arlene can weigh in this too. I'd like to hear her take on it. The end result of the task force was a scoping document that we worked together on drafting. And some of the main topics that came out of there was conditional use permits. So for example, this is an opportunity to simplify the permitting process. Specifically, it had to do with expanding legally non-conforming, and that's kind of a loaded term that we're looking at redefine, but legally permitted structures in the shoreline that don't currently meet the 150-foot setback, but want to expand within that setback or buffer. And some of those, the lateral expansion, we required a conditional use permit. If you wanted to expand landward, you didn't need conditional use permit. You needed a building permit. And that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me for a long time. We were requiring this higher level of review than we believe is actually necessary. So we're looking at changing that, eliminating the requirement for a conditional use permit for a lateral expansion, and just requiring a type 1 shoreline substantial development permit with a building permit for that process. Now, if you want to go towards the water, you need a variance. And that's because you're potentially having more of an impact on the shoreline environment. So I think that's not going to change, but this is an example of where we identified the ability or the opportunity to make the process easier for people to go through. And we got so many of these requests. This is the bulk of the requests of applications we got for shoreline development. Another area is aquaculture. We had some very interesting discussions about that. Sea level rise, that's another one. We need to, we have some policies on that now, but we don't have any strict regulations except to say we're going to consider sea level rise in permitting some of these things, and specifically bulkheads. But there may be an opportunity to add some policies on adaptation. Now, what do we do when a building is being impacted by more than usual storm surges or rising sea level? How do we adapt to that? Can we make it easier for them to move out of that impact area? So we're looking at that pretty closely. I think we can do something in that area. And then mooring buoys. That was an interesting topic. I'm not sure there's much we can do in that regard, but we're looking at that. And what else did we have? Boat launches, I think, was one of them. Anyway, this is going to be, these are the main topics that we explored in the task force. We're going to produce a final scoping document. We will post that online, and I'll show you that in a minute for everyone to review. And then we're going to take that along with a periodic checklist that we're required to submit to Ecology on our proposed changes to the SMP. And that's a deadline that we have to meet by November 30th. So we have a month and a half to review the scoping document. We have time to take it to staff and get comments. We have time to take it to the tribes, which we will have a separate track meeting with, and state agencies, and also local jurisdictions like the city, who, by the way, is also going through their periodic review at the same time we are, and the Port of Port Townsend. So one of the topics is probably most relevant to the chamber is marine trades. So that was definitely a topic. How can we encourage more economic development through marine trades in the shoreline jurisdiction? And my take on this is really that marine trades are driven by economic factors. I mean, you need to have a demand for those services, first of all, and then you need to have people like business people and tradespeople who are willing to start businesses or want to start a business to meet that demand. And then you need banks to supply the financing for those businesses. And then finally, you get to DCD and permitting those businesses within the shoreline. And our main responsibility is to make sure that we're not a burden to that development, that we, as long as you meet the environmental standards, which are not going to change, we want to make it as easy and not a hindrance to that kind of permitting. So that's really, and I think in that case, we're pretty well set as far as our current program. And if we can encourage more marine trade activity, we will, for sure, because that is a preferred use in the shoreline under the State Management Act. And in fact, I've had discussions with the Port of Port Townsend about rezoning the upland part of the Quilcene Marina to make it more friendly to permitting marine trade activity. So that's an example of where we can help facilitate marine trade development. But really, it's going to be dependent. It's like the housing. It's dependent on economic factors, really. And we can help in the permitting of that, but it has to be driven by economic factors to begin with. And let me give you an example from a recent permit that I issued for the Wooden Boat School. Now they have two areas of development down there in Lower Hadlock. One right on the water is where the school began many years ago. That's designated as high density shoreline. And then they have an area that's a couple hundred yards up Lower Hadlock Road, and it's waterward from the road. And they have a large educational boat building facility building there that I permitted under a conditional use permit, probably 5 or 6 years ago. They have other smaller shops set up there. And they had a temporary structure for a classroom and a shop. And that's been there for about 10 years. And that's actually, we reviewed that for land use. And so we approved that. We don't issue building permits for temporary structures. So we didn't issue a building permit, but we did issue a consistency review, land use consistency, and a septic permit. So we reviewed that and permitted it as an allowed structure in that area. And they've used that for a long time, and they've always intended to build a permanent structure once they got financing, and they finally did. This year they got financing through the state, but they need to implement that financing and build that structure in a certain timeline. So they came in, and we had a meeting. I had a meeting with their representative who was doing the work to design the new building, and I took a closer look at this. And technically speaking, because it's in the now this gets down into the weeds of the program, because there are shoreline designations, and you can think of those designations as the zoning in the shoreline jurisdiction. So there's natural, which is the least developed. There's conservancy, which is about 50-50 developed and 50% natural. Then there's shoreline residential. That's primarily residential development. And then there's high intensity, and those are the commercial industrial uses that are on the shoreline. So as the part of the Wooden Boat School that's on the shoreline is designated high intensity, the area upland was not, and it was designated conservancy to match the shoreline where the lagoon is. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there's a lagoon on the waterward side of Lower Hadlock Road. Now that makes sense as conservancy, but it does not make sense to have that designation on the upland part, because of the level of development is not consistent with a conservancy designation. It should be designated high intensity. So I looked at it through the lens of that, and I looked through the fact that we've already analyzed the site to death. I mean, it's had an archaeological survey, it's got geotechnical reports done on it. The septic's been reviewed by environmental health. We permitted the main big structure as a conditional use permit. And we've already reviewed this temporary structure. So we said, you know what? Technically, the code says because it's in the conservancy shoreline designation, it requires a conditional use permit to build this new structure. And that didn't make sense to me. So this is an opportunity to come in at a different way of permitting this, which we did as a shoreline exemption for a replacement of a previously permitted structure with a building permit. So we actually helped them through that process. Instead of getting a conditional use permit, which technically the code says you needed to, it didn't make sense, and it didn't actually meet the purpose and intent of the code as defined in our program. So we were able to do it as a type 1 shoreline exemption instead of a conditional use permit with a building permit. And now I think they're almost finished with that. And so they'll have a brand new permanent classroom shop to work from. And so that's an example of where our department can work with the marine trades to make it easier to permit some of these things. you know, yeah, it really depends on the time you spend working with people and looking at how we can use the code to get where we want to go. So I think that's probably the best example I have for permitting marine trade recently. Do you have any questions, or Arlene, do you want to say anything about the task force and your experience?
So I think you did a great job of summarizing the work that we did, and I want to say that the team at the DCD is pretty amazing and works as all of us do under strange conditions now in this COVID environment, and it adds a layer of difficulty that doesn't exist, and it makes public input very difficult. And so part of what's going to be important is today is that we send out a link to this video so more people can see it and get the answers to the questions and hear what we are. I had some questions from the Facebook group that might spur some questions in this internal group as well. And some of them I think you covered. One of them was about climate change, and climate change is causing tides to rise. How is that going to affect our local codes and shoreline requirements?
Yeah, that's to be determined. And I know that the Climate Action Committee, which is I think it's managed through the city of Port Townsend, and the local 2020 group on climate change has presented their comments to the city on this issue. And it's not just sea level rise, you're right, it is climate change. There are other impacts like more rain, more flooding. We're expecting that as a result of this too. We have a meeting with them, I believe, on October 26th. The city is going to give a presentation and go over those comments that we've received from Local 2020 on what they think or their recommendation on what we can do with the shoreline program in terms of climate change. So we're still in the process of reviewing that. That'll be one of the things that we'll incorporate. And I know we looked at this as part of the task force work, their comments, but I haven't had a chance to dig into that. And I'm going to just segue here to the fact what you just said as far as the difficulty of working under the conditions we're now under, but it's been a lot longer than that. In 2008, we lost half our staff, and we have never recovered that level of staffing. And yet we're expected to do the same level of work we did before. We had 4 long-range planners, and now I'm the only one. And so that's just an example of the staffing capacity and resource constraints that we're under. And we're doing the best we can with what we have. But it's great to have the city doing this at the same time. We can coordinate with them. We're anxious to hear about what the state has to say about this subject. Also the tribes. The tribes have a great interest in sea level rise because of the shellfish and the fish and their resource that they want to protect. So it's a very important subject. We want to do something, and it can be progressive too. We don't have to just wait 8 years to update this code. We can do it on a yearly basis. We have that ability in our code to do that. So I think it's an iterative process, but this is an opportunity to maybe come up with some policies on adaptation or actual regulations. We don't know yet, but we're still exploring that. And you should probably share the comments from Local 2020 and their climate action group. But the city will be having a presentation online on that, and I will be part of that. So by that time, I will have studied it and have something more to say about it. But that's a great opportunity for people to learn about what we're proposing to do in terms of climate change and sea level rise.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that we promote that and get the information out as well. A couple more questions from the Facebook posting. And one of them was about seawall requirements. And Are they changing, and what's going on with that? And is that part of this program?
Yeah, I don't think we're really looking at changing any of the regulations around Shoreline Armoury or bulkheads. We actually promote soft shore armory instead of those hard rock armories, as well as the Department of Fish and Wildlife is part of that permitting process too, and they're very adamant that you should look at soft shore armory and prove that you can't do that before they will approve hard rock armory. There's some real problems with that. In fact, all across the Puget Sound, jurisdictions are encouraging the replacement of hard rock armory with natural soft shore armoring instead. And there's actually a geologist from Bellingham who I'm working with on this type of project for Port Ludlow, down by the townhomes, right on the water. They're right on the water. And so this is an opportunity to build up a protective barrier from the shoreline to those townhomes that won't have an adverse impact on erosion, which the hard shore armory tends to do. And you can see that all over Puget Sound. We didn't know way back when that wasn't a good thing to do. We've learned a lot, and so now we're promoting this soft shore armory type of protection that that I think most people come to see the good why that's necessary to do, and it works just as well. You know, I don't know about the cost. I don't get involved in the cost of those, but we still permit hard rock bulkheads, and we replace those, and so I don't think our code is going to really change in terms of that this time around. But there may be some changes due to sea level rise and some of the adaptation strategies that we might not adopt that might have an impact over how we permit those bulkheads and the shoreline armory in general.
So there's a question that sort of kind of piggybacks onto that, although from a very different day on Facebook, and it has to do with mooring. And let me see if I can unpack this a little better. They understand that the county is trying to stop them from mooring unless it's permanent and we pay large fees. Is this right? Can you tell us about this part of the program?
Yeah, I'm not sure where that question's coming from. I know that we have worked with the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Health, the State Department of Health, in setting up a specific mooring buoy management program for both South Port Townsend Bay and Mystery Bay, which is Marrowstone Island. Those areas have a heavy concentration of mooring buoys, and in some cases there were mooring buoys put in without permits. And so part of the management program we worked on and adopted with them requires us to identify those unpermitted mooring buoys and requires the owners of those mooring buoys to get permitted. And I think we've pretty much got to the end of that. This has been a 10-year process. We actually got an award from the state for those management programs. So there's a limit on how many mooring buoys can go in those areas now as part of those programs. But as we learned during the task force work, I mean, there's people that are, what do you want to call it? I mean, they're just, they're yeah, they're putting in, and then the problem is, you know, too, is you're allowed to anchor pretty much anywhere that's suitable, and even in some cases that aren't suitable, and that has a negative impact on the eelgrass, and the eelgrass is important for forage fish, which is important to feed the salmon, and the salmon is important for feeding the orcas. So that's the chain of environmental impact that we want to avoid. So we want people to get permitted for mooring buoys, because when they do that, we do an eelgrass survey to ensure that they're not negatively impacting the eelgrass. It's better for the eelgrass and the beds if you're permitted for a mooring buoy rather than anchor. But I mean, there's some limitations there, and we, as a county, don't really have the authority to tell people where they can anchor, or, you know, they have to come in for a permit to get a mooring buoy, and they have to get approved by the Department of Natural Resources. So there's some limitations though, and I'm not sure if there's much we can do in terms of mooring buoys at this point. But as far as, you know, I heard a similar comment from the survey about stairs to the beach, which was another issue. That if, as long as you had enough money, you could get stairs to the beach. Well, that's not true. We're looking at changing that code in terms of, because we have a prohibition right now for stairs to the beach if you are on a feeder bluff, and how you define a feeder bluff is problematic. So we're looking at maybe changing that definition, as well as the definition of non-conforming development, which was an issue with some people. So there's a couple definitions we can change, and we may be able to allow stairs to the beach on some of these feeder bluffs with a geotechnical report that says, you know, this is okay to do as long as you do it this way. And that's better than a prohibition. So, which is what we currently have now. So depending on where you're located on the shoreline, you may be prohibited outright from putting the stairs on the beach. So yeah, those two things we're still looking at.
So there's a question in the chat about state law changes that the SMP might need to deal with, and also having to do with major septic limits in the Hadlock area. And does this review impact any of that septic capacity?
No, that's a separate issue. Yeah, we're actually going through a comprehensive plan amendment to update the Hadlock Sewer Capital Facilities Plan. And we're still looking for funding for that, but it's not really going to impact the update to the shoreline program. And what was the other part of the question?
The state law changes and
Right.
what in the SMP needs to deal with that.
Right. So the Department of Ecology, who actually are our partners through this process, we're going through a joint review process with the Department of Ecology. And I have to mention that the Department of Ecology's regional shoreline planner, Michelle McConnell, was actually the Jefferson County planner who wrote the current program that we're using right now. So you couldn't ask for a better partner in this process, because she's really an expert on how they wrote that program and why they did some of the things they did. I'm more of an expert in terms of implementing that program over the 6 years that we've been applying it to applications. So we've got a great partnership with them. There's a process called the joint review process, where we will team up and we will notice the draft for a 30-day comment period, another opportunity for public to weigh in. But the Department of Ecology issues what's called a periodic review checklist. And the checklist is basically a table or a matrix that shows all the changes to the SMA, the Shoreline Management Act, since the last time we did our update. And we have to demonstrate to them, to their satisfaction, that we are revising our code that reflects those changes to state law. So that's what the checklist is. They've got all these changes that they list, and then we have to respond on how we are changing our program to reflect those changes, as well as the amendments, additional amendments, and those are really the staff docket items, or the notes that we've made over the years about problems with the code and how we're going to address changes to that based upon those. So the checklist, the scoping document from the task force, the checklist, the additional amendments, or the staff docket, and the code interpretations are what are the body of work that are going to inform us on what the actual changes or revisions to the code will be. So yeah, we've got a great team that we're working on this update, that we're working together on for this update. And yes, yeah, we need to be consistent with state law for sure. And that's one of the main reasons for the periodic review, to ensure that we are. And it could probably, you know, be more often than every 8 years, but that's what the state law now requires.
I think the next question is totally different. And it's from someone on Facebook that has a great idea for an aquaculture business. They have some money and they don't know what to do next. So they want to start right. What do they need to know? How did they find the information?
Yeah. So as part of our lean improvement process that we went through a couple years ago, we developed, it used to be called Planner of the Day, but now we call it coaching service. So you can go online to our website and sign up for a meeting with a land use planner to discuss your development proposal or ideas, and we will sit down with you. It does require a fee because we have to pay for staff time. As I mentioned, we don't have the capacity to do it for free. We used to before 2008. But that's a coaching service, and you can also find frequently asked questions from our webpage. You should probably start there, and if your questions aren't in there, you can sign up for the coaching service to actually have a one-on-one with a land use planner. That's where you start, and that's part of our resource center service, Square One resource service. That's our upfront resource center, and we do that as part of that. And that was part of a grant we did with the Department of or the Environmental Protection Agency a few years ago. Michelle McConnell also worked on that with me. So the coaching service is really where you start. We can help you walk through the steps that you need to do to get that going. And that's where you begin, at the square one. This is better building starts here, better development starts with our department and the coaching service.
Wonderful. And this one's not that positive, but we're going to make it have a positive outcome. So we love I didn't get a permit. So they wanted to rebuild the dock on their property last year, and they got a no-go on a permit to do that. And it's deteriorating, and they want to invest in it and improve their property. So rather than just doing it, which they don't want to do, what's the best way for them to make this happen?
Well, this is one of those situations where I need more detail. So, you know, you hear a lot of, like, if you go in and look at the results of the survey, which I know you probably did, there's a lot of anecdotal information, which is not accurate. And part of the problem with that is I can't follow up with people because the survey is anonymous. And that's why I ask people that if they take the survey and they want to follow up with me on some of the comments they had, they can email me directly at any time, which I would really like to do. But yeah, I mean, you know, people hear things from their neighbors, or they think they heard a no, or when really it was, well, you have to do this, this, and this, and it was too expensive for them. So they said, well, I can't do that. You could do that. You know, development costs money. I mean, in any development, residential or, you know, commercial development, it's the price of development as part of our economics. So you just don't know what the factor was involved in them not being able to repair their dock. Now, if they didn't get it permitted to begin with, and they should have, then yes, but they can still do it with a new permit. Now, if you got permitted, and this is after 1972 in the Shoreline Management Act, and so if you built the dock after that time and you didn't get a permit, then you need to come in and get a new permit. That might be the case. Or if you got a permit and you want to rebuild the dock, it's a simple shoreline exemption. So we still have to review the rebuild, you know, under our program. But it's a lot easier than getting a conditional use permit for a new dock. So that may be what they're talking about. They may not have been permitted to begin with. They came in and asked us, can we rebuild it? And we said, no, not under an exemption. You're going to need a new shoreline conditional use permit. That may have been the case.
I would venture to say that that was the case.
Yeah, well, we don't have enough information to.
We don't, and they don't like to tell us where they live. They're afraid we're going to come and take pictures of their dock.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of property that have, all kinds of things on it, not even shoreline related, that are unpermitted and have been there for a really long time. So we just deal with that as we have to make changes going forward.
Right.
And we're all used to that. So I'm going to throw this back at our guests and see if any of them have more questions for you, David Wayne. Hearing none.
I would
good.
just like to thank David for the presentation, and I will be passing this off to some other people that I've been working on, other areas, to tell them about the recording that will be available. I think this was valuable information.
Okay. Yeah, and I'd like to just finish with a call to action. You always have a call to action at the end of your presentation. If you don't, you're wasting a golden opportunity. And that's basically, I'd like people to go to our webpage on the county website. And if you go to the county website, you can just do a search on Shoreline Master Program. And then you can pick the actual page for our, and I can show that to you right now if you you let me share the screen here.
I will. I'm just going to grab that and let you do that.
And on that web page is our survey. There's also a story map that has a survey embedded in it. That's an interactive map that shows you the shorelines of East Jefferson County. It identifies all the current or the conditional use permits that we've issued over the last 6 years. It shows the shoreline designations, which once again is basically the zoning of the shoreline designation or the jurisdiction. There's the task force work, the minutes, the recording of all those meetings. We will post the scoping document when that's ready. But let's take a look if we can.
And I want to add my thank you to you as well for all of this.
All right, so can you see our web page there?
We can.
Okay, so this is it, and it gives you some background on the Shoreline Management Act, the Shoreline Master Program, the task force. We're going to beef this up as we go, but then the Planning Commission role, it's a huge role for the Planning Commission, and Arlene, you are also a member of the Jefferson County Planning Commission, so
I am.
we've had 2 other Planning Commission members on the task force. We will be meeting in November to talk about that process and the role of the Planning Commission moving forward. And then there's the story map right here. This is the interactive map. You can go in and play around with this and look at it. Let me know, I'd like some feedback on this, but the survey is in here too. So if you want to go through the story map to access the survey, you can. And then we have the public participation plan, and you can look at the entire plan here. These are opportunities that are listed by date of how you can participate in the process. We finished the task force meetings. We're going to have one more with them after we come up with a draft. Then we've got this meeting scheduled. We also have this is the presentation I was talking about with the the Climate Action Committee in the city. Oh, I'm sorry, no, this is the Jefferson County Realtors. Yeah, so I'm meeting with them to talk about, really our focus is going to be residential development in the shoreline. I've been invited to a lot of their meetings over the years, and I really like that group. And they have a huge interest in the regulations as far as shorelines. The shoreline residential properties are premium, obviously. And then we have, I haven't listed it here, but we're going to list the meeting with the city and the Climate Action Committee. I believe that's on the 26th. So that'll go in here somewhere. Anyway, this is where you want to go to keep up to date on your opportunities to participate in the process. And here's another link to the survey if you don't want to go through the story map. So I encourage people to go and look at this on a regular basis to keep up to date. We're trying to keep up to date as much as possible. And also, you know, here's my contact information. So if you got a question, please don't hesitate to contact me by email. I'm very responsive. I'll respond within 24 hours for sure. And any questions you have related to the Shoreline Periodic Review Update, let me know. And then there's a couple links we're going to be adding to this. We're going to add a link to the Shoreline Inventory Characterization Report, which basically determines the shoreline designations, and then also our comprehensive plan, which all the policies in the SMP are adopted into the comprehensive plan automatically. So we need to be consistent with the comp plan. We'll add links to that. But that's the final, my call to action is to please participate in this process. It's your regulations, it's your shoreline, and it's your county. And you should be involved, and you should understand at least, you know, a surface level on what the shoreline program is about. And its preferred uses are really great. I mean, if you look at the Shoreline Management Act, it's very clear that the shorelines are one of our greatest resources. They must be protected, but we also want a preferred use to be public access to the shorelines and other development that's done right and it's done smart and it protects the environment. So that's about all I had, unless you had other questions.
So I think you just answered that last question, which was, I don't have waterfront property. Why should this program be something I need information about?
Right.
Yeah. And
Yep.
so I think that Facebook reader just got the information. It's a fabulous website. We sent out a link to the survey. We'll be sending out the link to this recording. This is, I think, just one of the key pieces in the puzzle that the Planning Commission has the opportunity to work on with DCD. And it's a great group, and it's a group that is way too small for the amount of work that needs to get done. So I think we need to give them a tremendous amount of credit, and to all the people who volunteer and the public who provide their input. So I want to thank you, David Wayne, for coming today and doing this and helping us help you to get that call to action out there. And as a reminder, the next Chamber Cafe is the first Friday of November, which is hard to believe it is November, November 6th. And that is a totally different topic. We're going from the shoreline to Recovery Cafe, and Recovery Cafe will be opening soon and will be such a tremendous community asset. And so join us on November 6th, 10 a.m. on Zoom, and learn more. Thank you again, David Wayne, for coming here today and for keeping these lines of communication and public input open. Thanks to you all for joining us and sharing your thoughts and concerns. And we wish you all a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank
Bye.
you very much.